fellow Sublime Text Fanatics, OdatNurd here. Welcome to the live stream for whatever day it happens to be right now. 11th? We took last week off. I'm having some dental issues. I managed to knock a crown off of one of my teeth, and then while visiting the dentist to see what we could do about that, because it's not the first time that it's happened, and they really should re-prepare the tooth and replace the crown and not just glue it on. We discovered that I needed a root canal too, and so I did not totally feel like a couple of hours of nonstop talking and sitting in front of a computer was really what I wanted to do. So we skipped last week's live stream, but we are good to go right now for this one. So here we go. We have some plans tonight. If you remember in the last stream, we were working a little bit on a plugin that Keith Hall worked on and added to the Sublime Scraps repository. And we're going to continue that on into this evening, where I got a few different things that we'd like to pull off here. And I don't know that all of them will be possible within the 2 hours. I've given them some thought, but not a lot of in-depth thought. So I have an idea of what I want to do, but I haven't thought it through enough to know if it'll definitely work or not, the things that we'd like to do, or how exactly things need to be structured. Knowing what you need to do is sometimes one thing, but knowing the best way to structure it, another. Just double checking. It is fairly warm in here again this week. Not as bad as it was. So I do have a fan back there running, blowing some air this way. Just double checking that my seated position here hasn't bumped the microphone or caused that to go all crazy. As a matter of fact, we might adjust that just like so. So I think it's probably about time to jump on in, don't you think? Let's go ahead and press the magic button. Hello, fellow Sublime Text Fanatics. Welcome to this week's live stream, starting proper after the introduction, giant live head thing. We got a few things going on here tonight. The first is that we're using the latest build of Sublime Text 4, if you will, or just Sublime Text, generally speaking, because the version numbers are going away once these new builds go. This is build 4081, I believe. And one of the things that changed in this particular build is that the default color scheme changed from Monakai to Mariana, as we can see here. I have been using Monakai as my color scheme for quite some time. I think the entire time that I've been using Sublime, because it was the default way back in 2016 and probably earlier than that as well. It was the default. I liked it. I had a couple of tweaks that I made to it, but otherwise I kept it. Now, unlike some people, I was using the default, but I did have the setting explicitly set in my preferences. So this wouldn't necessarily affect me, and I could continue to keep using Monakai because it is still present. It's just not the default. However, when I create videos for the other channel, which is linked down below and does weekly Sublime Text tutorials, I try to keep the configuration as stock as possible for Sublime. So there I'm using Monakai because it's the default color scheme. And once we start using these builds, Mariana will be the default color scheme. So I'm trying to get myself a little bit used to it. So I'm using it as my own personal color scheme as well. And that said, this has been ever so slightly modified. It's actually been modified to have a 5% darker background color, because really the thing that I don't like about the default Mariana is it's just a little bit too bright. But knocking the brightness down 5%, this sort of bluish gray color here, not too shabby. And as an added benefit, Mariana is the default color scheme in Merge and has been for some time now. Way back in the early days of Sublime Merge, when it was still in private beta with just a select group of people, I did play around with setting the color scheme to be Monakai in throughout Merge as a whole, and it worked pretty well. But as things went on and the build started becoming more feature filled, the theming engine kept changing, more things were being added, and I decided to just switch my Merge to the standard default color scheme. which was, as I said, Mariana. The nice thing now is that this is Mariana and text is Mariana as well, and Merge will pull color schemes as well as syntaxes from Sublime Text if they're both installed. So as an added benefit, we can see here, both of these are the same color now, so my merge is also a slightly darker color than would otherwise be the case. So that's some nice stuff going on there. I tend to find. Everything still seems to be going well. Just double checking before we jump into things. Now, in the last live stream, the thing that we were working on is some changes to this pipe text plugin that Keith Hall, my good friend Keith Hall, implemented. And oh, I just realized something important that I forgot about. We will check that in just a second. There's completely forgot about some stuff there. This is a plugin that was created by Keith Hall. It's part of the Sublime Scraps repository, which might be linked in the description. I'm not sure. If not, I'll drop a message in the comments and I'll provide a link to it. But you could also just look up Stealthy and Hasty as an organization on GitHub and find the same thing. It's a command that he implemented because in Sublime Text, the new builds, there's a plugin, a Python 3.8 plugin host, and in Python 3.5, there were some enhancements made to being able to execute programs and capture their output. So he created this very simple plugin whose what it does is you select some text and then you can invoke the command to execute a shell command and send the selected text into the command as standard input, and then whatever the output is, dump it into replace the contents of the buffer, which works great for what it is. There's a few things that we'd like to do with this, and in the last live stream, not last week but the week prior to that, we worked on some addendums to this, most particularly a pipe text wrapper command, which, oh, that is unfortunate. Let me just go ahead and do that. I'm probably going to have to amend that commit now. Code things need to look the way we want, which adds history. It actually shows the command prompt or the thing down at the bottom of the window in the input panel there, along with a history of commands that have been executed. And we want to add a few different things to that. So we have a few tasks here, 5 of them here, 6 because there's one more thing that I'd like to add to this, but we'll see when we get there. One thing is persisting the history. But first of all, this is executing, it's basically an implementation of the exec command such as it is, but very specifically for the purposes of, oh my goodness, executing a command, giving input, and then inserting the output. So it's nice to be able to have a history of commands to be able to do things. So we're going to want to add in a new argument here to the command for working dir, which very simply would allow it to set the current working directory at the point where it's actually executing the task, because that could conceivably come in handy. We're going to set this so that if you don't provide it, then it will be the directory that the currently focused file is in by default, and then otherwise just whatever it happens to be if the current view doesn't have a file name. And then other things we want to do, we can just cover them very quickly here, but we're not going to go into too many details. The ability to execute a command with a pipe in front of it, or sorry, an exclamation mark in front of it, and in that case, it's going to do something slightly different. Instead of sending the input in and replacing the selection with whatever comes back, it'll just insert the selection instead, so that you could use that to execute shell commands if you wanted to. Maybe it makes sense to do that when there's a selection that's empty as well, but we'll leave that for later. We want to get the main thing in. when this executes commands, it executes them in the main thread, which means if you execute a task that takes a fair amount of time, it will hang Sublime until it's done. So we want to have those things dispatched in a thread, so that doesn't happen. We also want to lock the buffer, because what's going to happen is we're going to select some text like so, for example, and execute the command and maybe say ls. It's going to execute that command and then replace the selection with the result of that, which we can see right here. And I had to select some text to get that to work, because otherwise it would have replaced the entire content of the buffer the way that it's currently implemented. So go ahead and back that change out. But we want that to be able to lock the buffer to make it read only, so that you can't continue editing, and all the selection regions would be saved and reused afterwards, so that once you start the command running, it will remain unedited until all of the commands are finished, and then it'll come back to being read write again. And then in a similar situation to that, we also want to do something akin to marking the selection with a region. Here we can sort of see it because it's selected, but even if this wasn't selected, we still want to know that, say, this was this text that was selected, and we want to have an annotation in here that says what the command is that's actually executing, which would appear over here in the gutter area on the right hand, sorry, not the gutter area, the right hand side of the annotation region, saying what the command is, and those will clear out as it's executing, and then you'd easily be able to see. Maybe we even add a key binding to allow you to jump between those things. A part of this is sort of intent on the idea that whatever action you're taking might take an excessive amount of time. This was conceived of as something like have a Java or a JSON file open and have a key binding that just shoots it directly through JSON prettifier if you happen to have one installed, including if you just wanted to prettify some small subset, you could select the text and do it that way as well. But it always makes for good software design to assume the worst, essentially. This came up recently. I don't know if it was in work or in the forum. I think it actually had to do with a default setting being changed. But yeah, sort of the idea that doing something like changing font rendering and how it works out of the blue affects everybody, and you need to know. Actually, I think that was something different. It was something about hardly anybody ever does a thing, so that's an edge case that we probably don't need to worry about here. And the response to that is no, you do need to worry about edge cases. Just because something isn't common doesn't necessarily mean you assume it doesn't happen, or not handle that particular situation. Before we finish here, I'm just going to go ahead and stage that and amend that commit because I do like things to look nice here. Now, one thing I'm going to do, and just bear with me for 1 second here. There is a little something. Let's see, that was there. I have a sample lower thirds thing that I was using last stream, and I just realized it's not part of my checklist because last week was the test. That actually be something different, wouldn't it? Oh, I should have tested that. Whoops, that is not the thing to do. I'm not in Sublime right now. On the pipe text package and taking your questions. Okay, so I'm going to save that, go, and I'm going to need to very quickly just pop over here and give that a reload. And hopefully that will work out well for us. My apologies for that little peek behind the curtains of that. So yeah, this is essentially something that's going to slide up into the screen every 10, 15 minutes or so. And timer just got reset because I restarted that to let people that are joining the stream know what we're working on, and that please feel free to ask any questions that you might have. So the first thing we wanted to work on here was include working dir, which adds the ability to specify the working directory to the command when it executes. If this isn't given, it would default to the folder of the currently focused file, if there is one, and that would ensure that if you use a command that wants to access anything in the current folder, it can do so. So, and an example of that would be, again, if I did the this, for example, this is currently running in the installation location, basically what the current directory is for the plugin host right now. And if some plugin code was to change the current working directory, that would probably change here. If you were on Windows, you might note that sometimes things default to the installation folder. This is the reason for that. And it's why when you execute a build system, you generally specify working dir in there to make sure that things run in the context of where you expect. And basically, working directory, current working directory, is essentially what directory was active at the point when you executed a command. Because if you were to try to open a file named Bob, then you need to be having that relative file name assumes that whatever the current directory is, there's a file named Bob inside of it. So things like that require these things to work. So this would go in here. Now, essentially what we did here was this pipe text command and plugin here is the one that directly comes from the Stealthy and Hasty GitHub repository, completely unmodified. And what we did in the last stream was wrap it with the ability to put things down here in the input panel with this wrapper command instead of modifying this plugin, because this is in the scraps repository and I didn't want to muddy that up, particularly while it wasn't in Git. Now we do have it in Git for the purposes of this particular tiny package, but we're going to sort of keep that, and we want to decide, do we want to roll, how many changes do we want to roll in, because we can modify the core command and then just have this wrapper that actually invokes that particular command. That's one of the things that's great about writing your own plugins. So this is the one that is actually responsible for doing things. So when you run this command, it takes a command or shell command. You're going to need to provide one or the other of those things. Otherwise, it's going to get very unhappy. And we can see that right here. If there's not a shell command and there's not a command, it throws an error. And if shell command is not a string, it throws an error. That is logging some stuff. This is where it's actually executing. Command executed with return code. So it's definitely just calling execute with standard in. This is from subprocess.run. So I would assume that that actually has a, we'll bring this jiggy over here. I would assume that it has a working directory argument to it, the same as the other things I do. Yes, 3.8.5. Oh, is that the version that we have here now? This is an example of the logging of this actually doing some stuff. Import sys.version is 3.8.3. So we're actually a tiny bit behind the curve on that. I would imagine that they will sync that up. Did I not push the key? There we go. Recommended approach is to invoke subprocesses to use the run function. Standard in, input, standard out, standard error, capture, output, shell, CWD equals. Okay. So I think what we would do here is that there's a couple of things that we could do here. Let's say CWD and text. And just to double check, the argument was, how are we doing that here? We're saying shell equals capture, input equals, encoding equals, right. wonder if that encoding should actually come from the current file and not just inherently be UTF-8. A potential to do. CWD. So we could say CWD equals CWD, like so. Now remember, when I did that, it gave me the Sublime Text installation folder. If we find the place where this is being invoked, we could say this instead, for example, and then if we were to execute the command, we would, oh, what did I do? Oh, whoops. I did not mean to do that. I added an extra selection there when I did not mean to. Pardon me. Okay. Yeah. That's embarrassing. So, and then we select, no, don't select that much text, just select that much text and do that. And now it's running in that directory. So that's exactly how we want this to work. So we would say CWD equals none, because the default is none over here, right? Yeah. And we can set this to CWD just like so. And then again, we're just going to double check that that does what we expect it to. It does. Okay, so what we want, the idea here is that this is going to be, this is a text command. It's running inside one particular command, or one particular view rather. So the directory for the current file is going to always be the same. That was a little fuller than I thought it was going to be. For reference, uh-oh. What is, oh, hey. The command palette's all the way up here and invisible. That's weird. This is an example of that command we've been executing, by the way. It's in the command palette there. Forgot what it was I was going to do now because that kind of confused what I was doing there. Oh, yeah. Thus. Here the working directory is an empty string. And if it's, oh yes, we need to add an argument to that too. Let's go ahead and shunt that over to there. And then we can continue down here. So this command also should take a CWD equals none. And then we don't need to have this one here. As a matter of fact, we would do this up here, I think. If CWD is none. Oh, sorry, if not CWD, that would work, right? The CWD was none. Then we said true, if not CWD, else false. We end up with true, like so. And if current work directory was an empty string, the same thing would happen. But if it was actually a path, then it would end up being false. So we can just say if there's not a current working directory and self.view.filename, then we would pull it out of the item here. We're going to need, yeah. We'll do that. That's probably broken now, right? Yeah. So what we're going to do is this. So current working directory is equal to os.path.dirname of self.view.filename. Thusly. So if I did that same test that I did before, now when I execute the command, we get the directory that this file is actually inside of because that is the default for this. But if we were to add, let's say we added some args to this command and said the shell command was print working directory. Oh, sorry, that should be shell underscore command. And the, pardon me, the, whoops, working dir is /temp, for example. Then when we select some text and execute, oh shoot, did I, the plugin broken now? Oh, that's weird. Run, oh, was it not called shell command? I thought it was. Command, shell command, none, right? Yeah. There's something funky about that I'm not entirely sure what it is. Just to check. Huh. Oh, that's the wrapper command. Right. Oh, my bad. Yeah, that's how that's supposed to work. The pipe text wrapper. How would we like to set this? I don't think we would we? If you were going to do this, I see my issue here. If you were going to do this, you wouldn't use pipe text wrapper. You'd use pipe text for this, and then select some text. And now, oh. Not entirely sure. Oh, right. I called it current working directory. Should be working dir there, I suppose. But we'll worry about that in a second. It just immediately executes with that particular directory, which is kind of what we wanted there. Let's fix this. Working dir. We'll fix that there. We'll swap that and that to working dir, because that's how exec works, even though that's not necessarily how this works. And then when we actually invoke the thing, we'll say working dir there as well. We want this line. Okay, well, that was a little more than we anticipated. I'll just add it back then. Any part of the chunk, it does all of the chunk. So we'll say working dir equals none, like so. And we actually need to cache this value now so that this will carry all the way through to the point where this is executed. Easiest way to pull something like that off would be this. pipe command cwd working dir, like so. And then we can say this. We would put that there, and working dir of, oh shoot, we don't have the view here, do we? Man. Oh, I guess we can fix that easily. We don't even need that. Lambda s self.execute for s and working dir, like so. Should be enough for that. Assuming that we did working dir there, so that part loads. So now this is pipe text wrapper getting that. Now the shell command here doesn't really matter because it's always going to prompt you currently. Really conflustered here. Do I have a version of this still in my user package, perhaps? Oh, it doesn't take a shell command, so you can't pass the shell command, right? I just finished saying that. Gripes on a cracker. So if we did, for example, print working directory, it is set to temp, even though this is what the file is currently sitting in. And if we did that and execute this, then when we do it, we end up with the correct path. So that part is working the way one would expect. We can go ahead and revert that whole file back to the way it was. As a wrapper, yeah, that should do what it is that we're interested in. We've carried that through. We might just sort of swap this for shell command like so. We can bring those down. So it's a little bit too long, not super bad. And that is pretty much all the changes for that. So let's see. Add the ability to specify the working directory to the command when it executes. If I thought that dog would. Something's making a weird noise. Add the ability to specify the current root directory of the command when it executes. We did that. If not given, it would default to the folder of the currently focused file. If any, totally did. That would ensure that if you use a command that wants to access anything in the current folder, it can. That was my toe. It can do so. So in that regard, this I believe is done. So let's go ahead and just vet that if we shall here. By saying that what we changed in the wrapper was giving it a working directory, passing that working directory through to the execute, which also passes it through to the command when it executes. And then over here in pipe text, this now takes a current working directory argument, which is provided right there. This command also takes a working directory, which is none. And if there isn't one and there's a file name for the current view, then go. So just to test this for one more bit here, we'll note that if I did this and said print working directory like so, we end up with the directory for this current file because that's the way that is set up. If we created a new thing and did this and said print working directory, we get the installation folder because this doesn't have a file name associated with it. But if we did view.retarget to say temp bob.txt, for example, then when we execute in here, we get temp like we would expect. And this is also an example of why we want to slightly modify how this command is working. So let's close that file and jump back to here. And I think that's all we need for this. Yes, so we'll stage that file, stage that, whoops, 2 files committed. So say add working dir, add the directory of the, sorry, add ability to set CWD, use the path of the current file by as a default if the view has a name. And we'll go ahead and, as is our case, go ahead and tweak that up after the fact. You don't need to see me typing that in here. So that's number 1 done. Now number 2 is if the command that you enter starts with a bang character, the result of the command would insert into the current selection instead of replacing the current selection. I don't think I necessarily explained that correctly. But here is an example. I'm here in the buffer. I don't have anything selected at all. And I do print working directory. What we get is this. Because what happens is the pipe command gathers the contents of all of the selections and then executes the command that you provide, passes to it standard in the selected text, and then whatever comes back, it replaces the selection with the result of that particular command. Now, if you don't have any text selected, we can see right here, then it uses the entire buffer. Pardon me while I scratch my ear here for a second. Apologies for any noise in the headset. If there isn't any selection, it uses a region that spans the entire buffer when it does so. And that means that when you execute the command without any selection, the whole file goes out, but the whole file also gets replaced as well. So what we would like to have here is the idea that you could send a command out and insert its text into the current file instead of replacing. And an example of why we might want to do something like that would be if we did this, shoot the ls command in, it executes it there. We could say read ls, and it will shoot that text in, right? Now, if I was to add some text, I could also say, oops, make sure that has a focus. Read in the current working directory, or the printer current working directory. It just inserts it in. It doesn't actually replace. And so we want to try and mimic that kind of action here in this, because I have like 20 years worth of muscle memory in doing that operation. And now that I have the ability to do this, I want to be able to do that as well. So the theory here is that if the command starts with the pipe character, the result of the command is inserting the result instead of replacing the selection with the result. So you could you could do things to execute various shell commands and capture their values into the current file if you wanted to. You could also do that to cat other files to inline them into the current file, which is kind of what that thing I was just doing was. You could read other files into the buffer and such. So there's a couple of ways to go about this. We could assume that if there's not a selection, then send the whole selection out and do everything like we do here, but insert and not replace. Or we could literally see, is the first thing in the command the bang character, and if it is, remove it from that character and set a flag so that later on when the command executes, when it gets to the part where it actually replaces the region, instead of calling replace, it calls insert with region.a or region.begin. region.b is probably best because that's where the cursor is, and that's probably what you would expect to have happen in that case. I think that's probably the way that we would pull something like that off simplistically. So this is gathering up the selection regions that we care about. Make sure that there is a command or a shell command, and if there is a shell command, it must be a string. Now here, if you provide a shell command, then what it actually does behind the scenes is convert it into a command that executes something in bash, which, as it says here, is stolen from the exec command that we have open in the other side panel there, which we could probably actually close now. It's somewhere probably in the async process, I would imagine, because that's where the thing actually gets launched out. If the platform is Win32, then command is shell command and shell is true, just like these lines over here. Otherwise, use bash. And the only distinction here between Mac OS and Linux for the exec command is whether it uses a login shell or not, which this doesn't do. Maybe it could. Hello, Ashwin. Welcome to the stream. We're just working on the pipe text command that we were working on in the last stream, adding some more stuff here. I've sort of boosted it out into its own little package. And the thing that we're currently working on is the idea that if you provide a command that starts with an exclamation point, then instead of replacing the selection with the command execution, it would just do an insert instead. And this was just sort of a clarification of how this logic is borrowed from the exec command for converting a shell command into a command string. So anything we do to modify this needs to happen here. If there's a shell command, then we need to modify this. Otherwise, it would have to be command. This kind of gets slightly hairy. You definitely want to do it before this manipulation happens, or bad makes life more complicated. If there is a shell command, then command becomes that. So if there's a shell command and a command, shell command takes precedence. So we could say a shell command and shell command. Is that how that works? Yeah, that's what I thought. But the if shell command would totally trigger out if there was an empty string, right? But that would totally be the thing we want. Yeah. Sometimes language, particularly Lua, references arrays and strings with one-based indexes instead of zero-based indexes because it was deemed to be easier for non-programmers to work with, and it's sort of meant as a language for non-developers. That messes with my head from time to time. Sometimes in languages, I'm not entirely sure exactly what that's going to do. Or let's say, I guess we need to do the same thing twice here, don't we? Kind of think maybe we just don't want command in here at all. Presumably you'd use a shell command, but I think I argued for including both of them to make it act more like the exec command. So unfortunate for me in that particular case. Do replace is going to be true. And then we can say, can never remember. Yeah, there we go. The appropriate shell command 1 and do replace equals false. And then we can say LF command and is there a way to abstract this away? I really don't want to try to get it. If I was doing this in C, this is a perfect example of a place where you could create a pointer that points to one of two variables and then manipulate the value that the thing points to, and the correct thing would be modified. I don't know that there's a Pythonic way to pull something like that off. Zero equals CMD 0, 1. This is crunky as all hell. Almost wish that it could be an extra argument, but you don't want it to be an argument because you want to be able to ad hoc it on the fly from the input panel and not from, say, an input handler, because we learned in the last stream that the key bindings in the input handler are hard coded and we can't get any history manipulation. And since list input handlers provide you a list of things, but they don't provide a text input, the best we could do for something like this to add it to the command palette would be to have it prompt you with the list input handler first to ask you if you want to enter a command or access the history, and then choose from there. Which doesn't seem like a great usability thing. We'll probably fiddle with that later and see how she goes. Let's say this gets logged when it executes, right? So if I did this, it still goes, and we see that it logged that. And if I did bang, print working directory, it still executes and it still says it did that. Let's go ahead and do a, where's the thing here? Command. That is a lengthy log. Is there a good place to insert this into the log? I don't know that there is. So just for the time being right now, let's go ahead and oops, let's do it up in the area where we're actually screwing things around. Would probably be easier to just modify the code to take the appropriate action, but you know how it goes. It was false in that case because I did the one thing, and if I did that, do replace is false. If I just pick this one, then do replace is true. So it's definitely pulling the right thing out of there. And the result of that would be down here. If do replace else self.view.insert edit region.bp.standard out. Okay. It's probably all we need for that. So now, if I did print working directory, it replaces the entire file with that, as I would expect. But if I threw that in the front of it, that did not do what I would have expected. Where'd it go? The end. Oh, right. Oh, right. That's an unfortunate side effect of how this operates. We don't want to do this if we're not doing a replace. I think that is the magic of this, because what this is doing is saying if not all of the selections are non-empty, then it just uses one region that spans the whole buffer, which means that the B point's always the bottom. Basically, the selection gets lost in that case. I never really paid full attention to that. So if I did this and did yaw, it replaces just that. But if there was another one in here, yeah, all right. So yeah, that makes sense that it does that. So maybe we boost these lines down. Like so. Verify first the shell command, then do that. Like so, I guess. Move that up. We could extrapolate this out into a method so it'll look a little bit nicer. First things at a time. If not all, and not do replace, then do that. Okay, so I think that should be what we want. Print working and do replace. If we did this, the whole thing is replaced. If we did this, it's just inserted wherever the cursor actually is. So even if it was at the end when we did it, it goes at the end, which does what one would expect it to do in that particular situation. If there's some selected text and an item and we do it, it gets inserted twice, which we're going to assume that's what you want if you're running a command that inserts in place, more facility that way. And if we did it this way, then it still does the whole thing. So I think that's pretty much what we want, except we want to remove that so we don't break things. I'm going to turn that off because that's kind of irritating me. Boop. So we already have this one helper for execute with standard in. And we also have some extra stuff that's happening here. This verifies that we got one of these two arguments and that if shell command was provided, that it must be a string. What if we boosted a method out that did this and this all in one and returned back a command entry with shell being true? And then provided an extra argument. Would that make this a little clearer? Let's see. Get command and shell. So we would pass. So what do we actually want in here? We want to pull this part out and this part out, right? We want to put that here. We probably want to undent that a little bit. So this is where we would say return back the command to execute and determine what command to execute and whether or not the result should replace the selection or insert after it. I think that's the way that we were doing this in the other. That's not how I normally do my command, but that's how. Oh, that should be indented trying to follow the method that Keith has for this, which is one line shorter than the way that I would normally do it. Um, so it's going to get the command and the shell command. No, there was one other bit here, wasn't there? Or was there not? No, that was that part right there. This actually makes this a little bit... No, it doesn't really make it nicer. It doesn't really make it nicer at all. Nope, nope, it don't. But we can check if the command needs to. So if there's a shell command, oh yeah, I guess we need to take that into account down there too, don't we? So this is actually going to have to return 3 things. Is that the end of the world? Is it the end of the world as we know it if this returns do replace, sorry, shell cmd and do replace? Because if we're on Windows, shell command turns into a command and shell is true. Otherwise, that's only if shell command, right? Oh, crap. This is more complicated than I want it to be, I think. We're going to get the command and the shell command. So the way that this works down here, let's just see it in C2 again. If the person passed shell command and we're on Windows, it becomes a command. If you passed shell command and you're not on Windows, it becomes I guess I'm falling into the trap of thinking that because it says command that it's not shell command, but that's not actually the case. The thing that it's providing to this call, it can be either a shell command string, I guess, or a list. So if you didn't pass a list, then it always just passes command as a list and shell is inherently false. But if you pass the thing as a shell command and not as a command thing, then on Windows, we just return shell true. Barky dog in the hallway. We just return shell true and replace that, and otherwise we convert. So yeah. Yes, writing, Ashwin just said, writing cross-platform code is so non-trivial, and this is entirely the case, yeah. And sort of surprising that parts of this aren't abstracted away in the underlying runtime, and I guess to some degree they kind of are. And this is one of those things that could theoretically be more complicated than we think it is, because on the exec command passes -L on macOS to make it run the shell as a login shell to make sure that it sources the profile, because otherwise it won't, which can cause environment variables to not be set up correctly. So there may need to be some action that happens there, but I'd have to test that on the Mac. So we're going to worry about that later. I would say shell command and do replace, right, is the thing we need to do here. So we're going to assume we need to do a replace. If there's a shell command and the first thing is that, then redact it off and do replace as false. Otherwise, if there's a command and the first item in the first command starts with that, then strip it off and do replace as false. Then it does this part, which eventually converts this so that if you passed in command, command is what comes out. And if you passed in shell command, then a command falls out, even if it might be a string, and then shell tells you something to do. So get execution action returns those 3 things, and that means that We don't need this because get execution action is doing that. And we don't need any of this because get execution action is doing that. And then we can just say shell command do replace is equal to get execution action, or the arguments I've already forgotten, which are command and shell command. I guess I should probably swap that, huh? Oh, that actually wouldn't have worked anyway. So that's lucky. Oh, what line is that on? Okay. Oh, this line where we were still doing stuff. That makes that a lot nicer. We need to know if we're doing a replace, so we know how to handle that. Get the current working directory, and away we go. So I think that should still work the way we want. So that replaces the whole buffer. That just inserts it. That inserts it after and leaves the selection alone, but still passes the selection out. So that's kind of nice. That's a little bit of an extra handy thing. And if this was just this, it gets replaced. This is neat. You can, the world's most complicated way to duplicate a selection of things. Or yeah, who knew that I don't remember how to pull that off. Oh, I'm thinking of that shell script we had back in the day. Oh, never mind. That's less interesting. But yeah, so you can do some cool stuff there. Oh, actually, we could even do this. Oops. This is a version of this with the lines sorted. That's a fair, cool bit of functionality to be adding in there for that. Without too much terribleness in this area, looks actually quite nice. It's just this part that I don't like, and I'm not sure if there's a more Pythonic way to pull something like this off, but I say that's probably not the end of the world for the purposes of this. So let's say that what we did was we added get execution action, which does some magic manipulation on the first item in the command array or in the shell command string. Then it does the thing that it used to do before to determine how it should execute it and returns those two things back that it already calculated plus a new thing. And now this code is shuffled down because we need to do this part first to know if we want to handle the selection slightly differently. That part's gone, that part's gone. And that is all we got there. So allow execution in place via command. So the command or shell command starts with then insert the result instead of replacing the selection. And again, we will flesh that out at a future time. That takes care of that one. Now is the time when we're potentially unhappy because the next thing is all these commands block the UI because they run in the main thread. So this should totally be spawning a thread to do the this loop right here. Should happen in a thread and not inline, because if I did something like sleep 5 and echo done. See the whole UI hangs for the 5 seconds. I can't interact with it at all before that happens. And that is not what we want to have happen here. Technically, I guess all of this needs to happen in a thread. The API is thread safe, but we lose the ability to do self-view insert or self-view replace because we're not going to be running inside of a shell command, or sorry, a text command. So if all of this was in some method that was executed as a thread, then we need to either have a text command that we implement that handles this, or code our thread to execute these using quote unquote regular commands. We could replace text by saving the selection, modifying it, and then going. That would still need a text command. Yeah. Because you can't modify the selection outside of a text command, or at least you shouldn't modify the selection outside of a text command. And although it will technically work, I don't want to get myself into a situation where I do something like that, because that's just, like a jerk operation. Because it screws up soft undo and the undo system and such. And we don't want to be the reason why something like that is happening. So let's say we create our own text command that takes a region and an insert and a string and does basically this. Easy enough to do. What would we call such a command? Maybe we'll throw it down here. Class pipe text action command, which is going to be a text command. We're going to take, what are we going to take here? A region, which will be a list, and string, well, let's say data, and we'll call it do replace. And yeah, okay. Logs failures. Huh. Just thinking about the idea here of how this logs failures if it can't execute the command for a particular selection, because one of the things that we have coming up here is going to have to take an action regardless. So one thing let's say that we just say print region data and do replace. Whoops. Like so. I'm going to cut that out and paste it here, bring it back, comment it out, and self.view.run command pipe text action. We're going to provide it region of region. And I believe we need to say region.a, region.b, because you can't pass a region. At least you didn't used to be able to pass a region. Should test that and see. That might be something that works now that didn't used to work now that we're in a new build. The other thing we take is the data, which is going to be p.standardout, and the last thing is do replace, which is do replace, right? So we just did this. Yeah, that's what I thought. Type error value required means that, whoops, that does not do what you want. Essentially, the only things that you can provide as arguments to commands are things that can be encoded as JSON, and regions can't be encoded as JSON because the internal parser doesn't know how to convert arbitrary classes. But there's new repr methods, so I thought perhaps that might no longer be the case. So if we did that, command is env bash pass print working directory. Boop, boop, boop. There's the region, the entire buffer, or there's the thing, and there's the true. And why did that end up on? Oh, because the actual string has a new line in it. So that 100% does what we want. So we could actually just sort of get ourselves back to where we were by doing that, I guess. And if we did that, so, oop. Oh, right. I guess I could probably p.standardout is data. I care to do that correctly. Can't pass tuples as arguments either, I don't think. All right, how about that? There we go. That's back to doing what we would expect. And we're executing a command here. So now this is all a candidate to be thrown into a thread. Oh, and Ashwin asked, how do you get those vertical indent guides to highlight as and when you move the cursor? Oh, you mean how this one is currently highlighted and showing the current indent level? That is, it's in here somewhere. Indent guide options controls how the indent guides are drawn. You can do draw normal, draw active. Draw active draws the indent guides containing the caret with a different color than the other one, which is how I have that set over here. I would imagine. Indent guide options. Oh, they're alphabetical, aren't they? Boop. I have it set to draw normal and draw active. So to do that, set this option like so, if that's what it was that you were asking. That's a lot more obvious in this color scheme than it was in Monokai, I think. Or at least, if that's what you were asking, that setting has been set that way for 4 years. So if you just noticed it now, that's making it more obvious that that's what's happening. Okay, so say all of this. Okay, so there's something else that goes on here, but that's something that we have. Lock the buffer while commands are executing and annotate lines where commands are executing is something that we're going to do next. So we're not going to worry about that here. But we do need to remember how to throw a thread off. Is this doing that? Yes. Threading.thread. And then you call start. Right on. Boop. It looks like that was the question that Ashwin had. Boop, boop. Let's just double check what is going on here. That's the argument it's being passed. File, execute, finished. Yeah. So, oh, the log needs to be down there too, doesn't it? Everything after here needs to be a execute. So what are all the arguments that this is going to need? It's going to need command. It's going to need shell. It's going to need working dir. It's going to need do replace. Right? We could test it by saying self.execute with command shell working dir and do replace. And if this still works, then that's good. Regions is not defined. Right on. How about that? Selection object has no attribute do replace. Oh, whoops. No, don't put it back. Thanks, fingers. Okay. That's back to doing what we want. So now we're free to spawn that with impunity. So import threading. Actually, maybe we want from threading import thread, just to make that a little bit nicer to look at, since we have stuff that we're importing from that one. So we could capture the thread. So thread target equals self dot execute, and oh, I guess if we're gonna mimic that, we could do it this way. Args is equal to command shell working dir regions do replace. And then we can say thread.start. In the world of the blinding and the purely theoretical, that would do something, right? Oh, maybe if we actually called it and didn't just reference a function. Still goes. Without it, still does not the thing we want. And if we were to do sleep 5 and print working directory, you can still move around. And after 5 seconds, the text pops in like yaw. So we're now executing this in a background thread, and we'll just undo that operation thusly. And that is, I think, all we really need to do for that. Commands block the UI because they run in the main thread. Let's not do that. So there we go. So this could just say thread blah dot start in order to trigger this off. We're setting it to just thread here. We could say self.thread. When this is actually done, it could kill things. Basically because maybe you want to be able to kill a long-running command. So it's a good idea to have that, but we won't worry about that for the time being, I don't think, unless it's really easy to pull off. We would need an extra argument here that tells it to do that. Actually, I guess that's probably not as bad as it could be, right? What the hell? We're in the vicinity. Kill equals false. We would presume that if you were doing this, it would only kill the command that's running in the current buffer, right? So everything should still work as per normal. Maybe we won't do, maybe we'll sleep 0.5. So there's just a slight noticeable delay before the insertion happens in there. We would say here, oh, sorry, self.thread, we'll do that. Self.thread.start. So that should more or less do what was already here. If kill, if self.thread, oh. We wouldn't say self.thread, we would say self.kill. Like so. Because the thing that's actually being stored in self.proc is yeah. Hide annotations, show errors in line. Right. What was I actually looking at here? It's actually an async process object that knows how to kill itself. But we're doing something a little bit differently here. That's why this has a start in a different place. So we would just have a kill thread method here. So we would say, we don't even need that, but we could say def kill thread. And once this falls off the bottom, we need to be able to cancel that thing out. So let's first check how that is done up here. Convolutedly, if we haven't been killed, I guess this is why it's wrapping it in an extra object. Maybe we should do that to make our lives a little bit easier here for this part. So yeah, let's just leave that part out for the time being. We won't do that part and we won't do this part. We'll leave that as an exercise because we got bigger fish to fry at the moment. But in that case, we don't want those either. That way is good enough. Double checking. Oh, remove that line, huh? All right. Sure, if you insist on me not having a thing that's definitely not there. So that's all good. We'll jump over here and we're importing threading. We're actually splitting thread out. And as we can see here, realistically, all we did was take most of this logic, throw it into an execute method as is, except for this part, which all got moved down to here and a new pipe text action command, and everything is good. So we can just stage this and say run commands in a background thread. We don't even need to add a reminder for what it is we did or why we did it, because that one should be pretty obvious, I would assume. Yeah. Whoops. Next on the list, commands should run in a background thread. Yeah, they should. Lock the buffer while commands are executing to make sure changes that come back don't mess anything up. If the job takes some time, the buffer should be set to read only so that no edits can happen while the command is in progress. This says it would have to save the selection ahead of time so we don't rely on those since they could change. But actually, that's already happening, as we already saw here. If I did this up here and gave this a 2 second, if we wait 2 seconds, 1, 2, it gets inserted right where the cursor is. But if I did it again and moved way down here, it still gets inserted up where that was at the time. So this one is simply done as thus. Self.view.setReadOnlyTrue. And I believe the API won't do anything if that is the case. Text piped and replaced successfully in 2 seconds, but actually, no, nothing actually happened. So we need to just add a quick little modification here. That does this. And that should be good to go. So if we did that, I can't type, the text inserts, and oh, yeah, okay, yeah. We need to know when that thread is finished, so that actually, I guess that means we can do the cancel thing if we wanted to. So we can say what would we call such a method? Self.view set read only false. Should work just fine. Should work just fine. Self.view actually something that we could use in this. There's one other thing that I thought of that might be an important thing here, but we'll worry about that in just a moment. Set timeout. View.run. Oh no, actually we don't even need to do that. We just do self.finish, where we would say, for example, so if we did this, we can't type, it inserts, we can type, and the thing says ta-da. So good to go. What happens when the command is finished? What happens when it's done? And life is good in that regard. So let us, because that was very simplistic for that one, is what exactly do we do? We set the view to read only before we spawn the thread. Inside the actual command, we make the view not read only so we can do the modification. Then we set it to be read only again. Theoretically, this could capture the state and then put it back if it wasn't. But we're kind of assuming here that that's not something we need to do. And the thread now, pardon me. Oh, I blew my brains out. Oh, did I undo too much stuff here? No, that's right there. Oh, it got bunked into this one. And when the thread is done executing, it sets a timeout to call the finish method, like so. This could theoretically cause issue. Well, this thing is going to hold a reference to self, so this thing will definitely still be here. So let's stage that and say lock the buffer while the commands are executing, for example. And we're done. Now there's something that I'm curious about here. One is that this is totally going to do something because it made the buffer read only and then put it back. So I guess that's the reason why we might actually want to pull that off. So maybe we will actually fix that. What would happen if I open the command palette while the thread is running? Will it print the output to the widget? No, I don't think it should because it captured the the self.view of the command instance that was active while it was running. So we're going to fix that thing just a second there. But let's say that I actually did that. Oh, have the command palette open. It still inserts down there. I'm noticing in this build that the command palette has a high incidence of opening way too tiny, like so. But again, maybe I need a longer delay in there so that I can test it, because it seems like if that was open, something funky happens to the command palette. That seems very repeatable. It still inserts down there, so that's cool. What we actually want here, though, is read only, I believe, is the thing, right? Yeah, okay. If self.view.is read only, reset equals false. Reset equals true. So with that in place, if I did this, I can't type in here. And then once the 5 seconds are finally up, it inserts, and I can type in it again because the state was saved. Here I'm going to have to exec.py. I can't type in here. I hit the command. I do the same thing. Probably didn't need to keep the 5-second delay there. It gets blamed into the buffer, and should that not have... Should that not have done something different than it just did? If the view is read only, then set reset to true and set read only to false, and then only set it back to true if we set reset to true, which is not the default. So this really seems like I shouldn't still be able to type in this thing, all else being equal. That's weird. And down the rabbit hole we go. We'll just do this because it's going to be faster. Still allow me to do that. So back that up. If this is the one and I hit it like so, it says was read only and resetting, but it clearly did not. That is super intriguing. Oh, because of that other thing we did. Finish is always setting it. Right. I guess we probably want something like that in that case. Before we do anything in here, self.was read only equals self.view.is read only, like so. So, okay. Hit the command, it inserts. Really? Come on, man. Resetting initial state back. Oops. That definitely did a thing. Let's go ahead and reopen that. So we hit the key, go like so, was read only, resetting initial state back. How about we do the state properly? How about that, huh? Put it back to the way it was. Okay. There we go. But nope. I guess I'm thinking about this a little too complicatedly. Just need to do this. Why do I need to even have it? Oh, an if in here in the first place? That is not anything that is strictly needed. So we will say, if we do it here, we can't type. It inserted. We still can't type. We can type. It inserted. I'm really going mildly insane here. Is read only. If it was true, then set read only would be set to true. If false, it would be set to false, right? Was read only resetting. Okay, so we would say that and a self dot was read only. And get rid of that one. So if that's the thing, we shoot that in. Read only state is now true. Right. And how is that coming up with that? Why is read only? Because this is inside the thread. Oops, that seems like it would not be the case. Oh, because I did that. Christ on a cracker. Okay. I think I've been an idiot long enough with that operation. All saved. Can't type, inserts, still can't type. Can type, insert, still can type. And if I did this with one that has a 5-second sleep, I can't type all throughout that whole operation. But once it eventually inserts, I can type again. And similarly, it is locked. Not that I could type anything in it anyway. And when that's done, that goes. Right, so that is good. That's what we want. We're going to iterate on this in just one moment because we actually want to have something that tells us why this is actually locked. Just for a good user experience. Oh, yeah, we don't need that anymore. So that should just all do what one might like. So what we're going to do before we kick this off is self.view.setStatus. I think that, I can't remember the key, then the value. Yeah, okay. So pipe command. Executing pipe command for so. And we would say self.view.setState. Oh, sorry. What's it actually called? Erase status. Erase status pipe command. So if we were to hit this and there was a ridiculous delay of like 10 seconds in here, then we're not allowed to type anything in here. The status bar says executing pipe command all nicely for us there. And then once it's done, that goes away. So if we wanted to, we could look and see. And as an added thing that could happen there, it could have a little spinner in there as well. But we're only willing to go so far for this because we're actually fairly close to being able to do all 5 of these tasks for this one evening. So let's say what it is that we are doing here. We are discarding those lines. Capture whether the state is read-only before we set it to read-only, and add a status that says that we're executing pipe command so anybody can tell what we're doing. When we're finished executing, instead of setting the buffer to false, we set it to the state that it was originally, and then erase that status that we added. We don't actually need that in there. Should have been gone in the prior thing, but what can you do? And in our command, oh, I guess we need to tweak that too. We don't need that tracking anything or that. Actually, we could probably do the same thing as the other thing, right? ro equals self.view dot is read only, and then set read only false, and then set read only. Well, we'll call it was read only there too. What the hell? Oops. Wrong key. Should do the same thing, but it looks a little bit nicer. But we'll double check that we didn't break anything. We're not going to use a delay of 10 though. We'll do this. So still good. And one more. Good. Back over to here. All good. So let's say, what was the last? Lock the buffer while commands are executing. That is what we're actually working on here, right? So we're going to amend that previous commit or what it was that we actually did there. We're going to stage this stuff and we're all good to go. And we will just amend that previous commit. And then the last thing is this, annotate lines where commands are executing. And the idea behind that is commands could conceivably take a while to execute. So while that's happening, mark up the spots where the insertion is going to happen. And that would mark the selection regions and use an annotation to indicate what command is being executed. So this is sort of why we did this way, because we have, before we launch this, the list of all of the regions that we're interested in. I'm going to dump that over there for the time being. There's one other thing we actually want to check. Actually, let's check that first. If I was to create a new buffer, and for the purposes of this, let's clear the console. And up in here, I said, let's give this 10-second delay and then echo done, like yeah. That is the view that has the focus when I did this. And now I'm closing that view. I'll put the cursor right here and watch in the console to see what happens when the 10 seconds is up. It says it executed okay, no actual errors. One thing that this could do is verify that the view is actually valid and not do something if it's not. So that is executed, logged. We could say, I can't remember. View is valid. Return a bool indicating if this view object is valid or not. A view becomes invalid if it's no longer attached to a buffer. I think that would happen here. So let's go ahead and just print self.view.is valid. It doesn't seem to be an issue here, so it's nothing we need to worry about in the general case. But again, if we do that, hit that, and then close that buffer, leave this, when it eventually goes, the view was still considered to be valid. So I think in that case, we might be maybe holding on to the reference to the view as a part of the thread. So even though it's not part of the window, the object is still there. So that seems like it's probably safe. So we won't worry about that for the time being. We can worry about that a little bit later. But the last thing we wanted to do is annotate the lines, and that's an add regions thing where we can add some annotations to this. So what we would do is, before we fire this off, self.view.add regions. The regions we want to add are pipe command. Let's say the actual regions themselves is the list of regions, which we knew is either going to be all of the selections or one region that represents the entire buffer, which is still a list. Specifically for reasons like this all ends up working out the way one might like. Let's say the scope is equal to comment. We'll leave the, do we want an icon in here? I suppose, yeah. Icon is equal to circle. Bring this down like so. Actually, we might even do it this way. The scope is that, the icon is circle, annotations is equal to, hello times 5. That's what we want. Stuff here times the length of regions, so that there's one for each of the regions in the list. And flags equals, where are we going to actually throw in this? Sublime dot draw no fill. I think we want it to just be boxed out so we can see exactly where it is. It would normally be the selection. Maybe we do want, well, let's try that first and see. Yeah. So we'll do this just once here like so. So if we hit this, whoa. For this one, I guess we might actually need a delay there, huh? No automatic close button on these things. There's an on close in this, isn't there? A callback that we called when the annotations are closed. I could have swore that these are supposed to automatically have a close button on them. Whoops. The region actually moved. Oh. that wouldn't matter if there was a delay, right? If that was just the way that was, and there was a sleep 5 and print working directory, then each one of them says where it's happening, and it's not until the insert actually pops it in there that, oh yeah, and it's going bottom up instead of top down. All for the best. We need to make a slight modification to this, but those were all correct until that popped in. So, oops. Well, that's an unfortunate turn of events for that. Should we do that, and then I can undo that one, and life will be good. Yeah, all right. Gets the regions associated with the given key, if any. Now, here's actually something interesting that I hadn't pondered before. Normally, what you would do, and let's say, for example, this line was commented out. Whoops. But, with the Python version of the comment. And there was there. Whoops. And we did this, but the sleep was 0.5. And we watched them slowly pop in like so. Undo all of them. Normally, what we would do here is we need to have a list of all the regions. Yeah, I guess we got to finish that up. We got like 3 minutes in the stream, but we didn't have one last week, so let's go a little bit long here. This has the list of every possible region. Yeah, I don't need to pass this around. What am I even talking about? Here in this command, we have a region. As a matter of fact, let's bump that up to there so we can do all of this action. What we would normally do is say regions equals self.view.get regions. And the regions we would get, or what did I named that pipe command, didn't I? Do pipe underscore CMD. Yes, I did. Pipe command. Get the list of regions, if any. So if I was to say here, view.get regions does not exist, we end up with always an empty list. We don't have to worry about that being none. So we get a list of all of the regions. Then we remove from there one of the regions that we no longer want to be in there. And for that, we might say Python remove item from list. Remove the first instance of a value in a list. Okay, well that seems probably easy enough. Regions.remove region. So the one that we're actually doing something with is one that no longer needs to be there. So remove it from the list. And then we would do this again, like so. Okay. And then if we had one here and one here and here and here and here, and we hit this, each one of those has a region. We can see those dots disappearing from there as they're all going. And again, just to see that happening, there. I'll do this with a bit of a longer timer so we can actually see this. With 2, See, all of them have dots, and as the item comes in, that dot is removed from the item there. Now, what happens if this has annotations when we do that? We could actually just sort of, it doesn't really matter where in the line it is, we're going to undo it anyway. Oh, I probably broke it, didn't I? Yeah, I didn't undo enough times. Shoot. My bad. There's probably a lot more new lines in here than technically need to be. Okay, let's try that again. There, 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 there. Do it this way. They're annotated, and then as they're removed, the annotations get lost, if you will. There's no way to get the annotations that are associated with a region. So if we wanted to do this, we would have to keep the list of annotations in here. Technically speaking, that's not the worst thing in the world. We could store a list of things. What we're annotating in here, what we want to annotate in here is the actual command that we're waiting on the execution for. One thing I want to test here is maybe I just need to have do we just need to have a handler set there? So it just sort of occurred to me that I think the exec command, when it does this, would have close button. So that's exactly how it's doing that there. The regions, the thing, the annotations to be added, which I would imagine is, actually HTML. Which is not what we're doing. It has the style sheet. It has an error. Yeah, we won't worry about that at the moment. Maybe the fact that there's an on close here. But in any case, this points out what I was going to say here after my little side ramble, is that in the exec command, the annotations are the actual errors. So there's one for everything. Here, what we're annotating it with is the command that was executed. So in that case, it's going to be the same all the time. We don't actually care per se. One thing we would do, however, is this. We would say set annotations with, let's say, regions and command text, for example. We would cut that out, paste it here. This would be command text, and here we would say self.set annotations command goes here, like so. And then we could copy, maybe we would actually pass regions, like so. Down here, we would similarly do that. Now, if that was the case, if that was what our thing looked like, then if we did it for the multiple items as we have been, it says command goes here, and as each one gets inserted after the, oh shoot. That's not going to work. That needs to be a top level thing. My bad. Let's move that out. Two. Whoops. We'll cut that and boost it up to here. Now this doesn't get a self, it gets a view. And then that goes like so. And all of these come back. Set execution annotations like so. With a line and that. And then self.view, and the last one does the exact same thing. We do that here. And for our purposes here, self.view erase regions pipe command. Whoops. To get rid of all of those. So everything is all good. So let's see if that works a little bit better. There's the command that's being executed, and as they go, the command gets knocked off of the list exactly as one might like. Now, the unfortunateness here is that each one of those has to be undone individually because there's multiple invocations of that command happening. So another thing that this could do is capture all of the items and then replace them all at the end. Maybe that's something that we want to do here. But what we actually want is not command goes here. I think we actually want this to know what the command text is, right? Which is problematic because if it's a shell command, that's what you want. And if it's not a shell command, you want the first thing, but you need to know what the command text was before the manipulation, which happens in get execution action up here. This is the part where it knows that it's doing this. If you passed shell command as something in here, then whether it's Windows or anything else, it's going to set command to be what the shell command actually was set to, or that gets it set to the string here, it gets set to the list. But in both cases, we could say command text is equal to shell command. Otherwise, actually, do we actually care about that? I guess we do, don't we? I guess we would just say dot join command like that. So now wherever we call get execution action, there's going to be a command text that falls out of that. And set execution annotations is going to call that. And working dir command text regions and working dir command text regions, and this takes a command text like so we can propagate it over to here. Region, how did I do that? What order did I do that in up here? It came before the regions, right? So cmd text region, and lastly command, whoa, shoot, command, command text. Still seems to load. Sleep 2 and boop, and that's exactly what happened, which is sweet. If we said view.run, oh, yeah, I guess that wouldn't work, would it? I guess we want bin bash minus c sleep 5 and ls at that location so that we could see it's happening for the whole file. And yeah, I guess we also for our purposes here, we have to put it as the very first thing of the very first thing, which is weird, but does what we want. And away she goes. So perfect. That is going to do what we want there. So the last thing to check here is let's just try this and see what happens. What was the actual, doesn't necessarily know, does it? Optional Unicode string of the CSS color to use when drawing. Optional collection of Unicode strings. There should be the same number of annotations as regions. We're just passing in plain text, which should be valid HTML, right? So we could worry about styling that later. Or no, huh? Just X? Just because I want to see what that actually does. All right. So this would tie into our ability to cancel a running job. So for the time being, let us redact that out. That seems like it is working great. And what do we say here? Command should could conceivably take a while. Mark the selection regions and use an annotation on the first line of each to indicate the command that's being executed, which it is. So we would just jump on over to here and let's validate what we did. Our get execution action needs to come up with what the actual command is, which we're doing here so that if there's a shell command, it's a shell command. And if there's a command, you get the whole thing. But we don't necessarily need to see user bin env bash minus c ls if you used shell command to execute ls. That's too much information. You want to be able, you want to see in that annotation what the argument was that you passed and not what it actually eventually started running under the hood. The log is where you can find that if you're interested in that. We have this new item which will add annotations, so that's happening in exactly one place for us to do something with. So we could add our own little icon in here if we wanted, say a little chevron of some sort. There's one in the theme, so that actually is something that might actually work. Um, and then when we call that, we get that command text, we set up the annotations, and we need to pass them to our thread because every time the command executes, to do something with the region, it also needs to update the annotations there. Because the only way to remove partial regions is to reuse the same region key but give it a different list of regions than it had previously, and then the ones that didn't used to be there go away. And as we saw, adding regions is actually also added to the undo buffer as well. So um, for usability purposes, maybe instead of doing this, the execute just runs this, captures all of the results into a list, waits until it's done, and then at that point where it calls finish, uh, it could set read only to back what it was, erase that status there, and then do all of the insertions all at once. And if we did that, then our annotations could use that on close. And then while a long running command is running, you get the indication of exactly where it's running, what's going to be replaced when that command is done. And clicking the X on any annotation could go off and stop the thread from running in the background and cancel the entire operation. But for our purposes here, let's stage this file and then say, whoops, annotate regions that will be replaced. And that's pretty much all we need for that. And we have covered every single item in our list. We added the ability to specify a working directory, which is going to default to, if you don't provide one, the path that the current file is sitting inside of. And otherwise, it's going to be set to nothing. So you'll get just some default unless you specify one. We specified that if the first character of the shell command or the first item in the command array is an exclamation point, it's removed, and instead of replacing the selection, it's still passed as standard in, but the result is appended or inserted into the buffer instead of replacing the selection instead, so that we can do things like inline commands without having to weirdly select a line first. Otherwise, it just makes the whole file go away, which is a little bit of a drag. And then commands execute in a background thread, quick and easy in that regard. The buffers are locked while the command is executing so that you can type stuff in there and do things. And each one of those commands is actually another reason to do this. I forgot to mention is that as the thread is executing, that's when it's pulling the string out of the buffer. So you want to make sure that when you hit the command, what gets passed to the external command is exactly what was in the buffer at the time you pressed the key, as opposed to what might be there when it actually happens, which if you're doing a sleep is definitely something that you want to have happen. But even if you're not, if it's a command that just takes like a half a second and you did something and then typed some text, you could get a weird result out of that operation. And then lastly, these lines are annotated currently, showing exactly what's going on there. And that could be a little bit better. There could be some HTML in there to style those things. There's other things we could do with this as well, like, for example, this stores history, but whenever this plugin that is the wrapper that handles that, whenever that plugin gets reloaded, the history is lost. So this command could actually stash its history in like the settings file or in some temporary file in the user package so that that carries over, things of that nature. However, we have gone 20 minutes over, so I think that is a good return to form, if you will. And we should be good to go for this. Now, next week's stream, and as all the other streams are scheduled out, I had to bump last week's one if you missed the beginning part because I was having some dental issues, if you will. I have a crown that came out, and when I was seeing a dentist about that, I ended up getting a root canal, and as a result, I didn't really feel like sitting and talking or really doing much of anything. Actually, I mostly just played Minecraft and dug a big hole to collect resources. But I still have some problem there, but it's not as bad as it was. So I don't see any reason why the next week's stream should go awry. The next time I visit the dentist is the day after the next stream. So that should work out well. We'll see what it is we're working on. Maybe we'll continue working on this and cleaning things up a little bit more, because what we have here now is actually something that's starting to get into the territory of something that could be released as a package. Maybe that's interesting. We'll have to talk to Keith to see what he thinks about that. If we want to promote that out, and we could combine this into one plugin, provide settings for how these various things work. I also had the idea of using the command palette to be able to enter a command or select history. You wouldn't be able to do it in the same way we do it in the input panel, but it could still be a handy way to go. So we'll see what we think about that. However, until um, the next stream, we don't exactly know how this is all going to shake out. What we do know is that I do one of these streams once a week, and I do have another channel which, rain or shine, sickness problems or not, as evidenced by those ones I did while I was sick, I put out a video every week. That is a Sublime Text tutorial. The next one coming up is going to be a plugin 101 video, which, if I remember correctly, is going over the methods that are in the input handler classes, because the last video showed what input handlers are and how they work, which is an important first step to knowing what all the arguments are going to do. We didn't do that for commands because it's fairly obvious that a command does something, and it's very easy to demonstrate all of those things while talking about commands. But there's a lot of setup involved in the input handler, so I wanted to get that done first. Until that next tutorial, this is OdatNurd asking you to please have a sublime day.